And welcome back to another episode of the Unofficial Gilded Age Aftershow, where we are talking all things HBO's The Gilded Age, all of the historical truth behind the fiction, and tons of drama as well. I am Kelsie Paul. I am your host and the interim director of Learning and Visitor Experience here at the Frick Pittsburgh. I am joined today by two of my favorite coworkers, our executive director at the Frick, Amanda Gillen, and our chief curator and director of collections, Dawn Breen. I am not going to waste an ounce of time because we are trying to cram this all into an episode. It's a holiday week. We're trying to keep things short and sweet, but there's a ton to get through. So we're going to jump right in on episode 2 of season 3, What the Papers Say. Our episode synopsis is, amid their domestic quibbles, Agnes and Ada welcome the Scotts into their home. Meanwhile, Bertha and George disagree about Gladys's future. I think that is the understatement of a lifetime. And we're going to start right there. We're going to pick up in where we left off with the first episode with Gladys running into the night. And we now know that where she ran to was where we suspected, which was to the Carltons' house. And there's a ton to unpack with Gladys's storyline in this episode. I would say her storyline is probably the majority of it. We're going to try and take a swing at most of it. But, you know, one of the things that we were talking about, Dawn, is that neither of Gladys's sort of romantic pursuits with either of her potential suitors are really going the way you would expect a courtship to go during the Gilded Age. And so I think it's helpful maybe for us as a reminder of like, what is this process supposed to look like in a normal circumstance?
Good question. I think courtship is not that different from dating today at its essentials. It's that time between the formal introduction, but before an engagement announcement. And like everything else in this era, there are strict rules and societal expectations, but usually it starts with an introduction that happens with chaperones present, generally in a public place, and usually through a mutual social acquaintance. And we don't necessarily see that happen. We do, I guess, with the Duke. But then you progress into these typical courtship activities. It could be as simple as calling, just paying a visit at home, but it could also be going out to the theater or opera, horseback riding, taking a walk through the park. General rules are that physical contact is frowned upon, which Larry and Marion do not abide by. And chaperones are almost always present. So generally the groom-to-be would have already met and received the approval of the family kind of during this process, which we do not see with Billy Carlton. He has very clearly never encountered Gladys's mom or dad before, and he chickens out big time when he gets an opportunity.
Yeah, and so of course, I think it's not all that different, like you were saying, than a lot of engagements and marriages today, right? Like conversations between families. Oftentimes there's still that traditional thing of, a potential groom going to a father and or a family and asking permission. But it's like Billy goes from 0 to 100. And I know, Amanda, you were saying that he flubs hard. He flubs hard, and he does it in a public space, which is a little weird of a choice. And in the end, he kind of proves Bertha right in terms of her worries about what kind of husband he would potentially be.
I don't think I saw that in him the last episode. I thought maybe he would be more of a fighter. I think they cast this role really well. The actor is kind and smart and cute and all those things, but he does also sort of wimp out in a way that you feel badly for him. You feel badly for Gladys, but there's this scene where, and we were talking earlier about how poorly he chose his moment, right? You don't want to waltz into a room full of grown men to a man you don't know and say, "Sir, can I marry your daughter?" Not how you do it. He really did, but it just goes to show he doesn't really know what he's doing. I mean, Bertha's, sees through him in a second for different reasons, right? He is not what she wants for her daughter, so nothing he does is going to be right. But she also, I think, sees a young man who isn't ready to take on what he's trying to take on, and Gladys is young too, and yeah, so he just does sort of wimp out in a way that crushes Gladys. I mean, that's what you feel bad about. Like, he clearly panics and runs and doesn't talk to her father. But she has put faith in him. She thinks she loves him, and she's ready for him to stand up and, say, like, I want to marry your girl. And he just doesn't have it in him. And, then they go on to sort of, his mother's like, you dodged a bullet, basically, like, this family is too much. This is not for us, so it works out the way it's supposed to. There's that saying that moms know a bad boyfriend, a bad friend in, 10 seconds for their kid. Bertha's methods and means are maybe not, it's not like she's entirely looking out for Gladys, but she did see that Billy he's not the boy for her. Even aside from the Duke, he wasn't the right man.
I am like a little baffled. I was thinking about this earlier. I'm a little baffled by Mrs. Carleton, though, because she clearly is a member of society. She understands how this is supposed to go. She very proudly declares that, her ancestors signed the Declaration of Independence. Like, she should know her way around this. And I guess she's taking Billy's word for it when Billy and Gladys are telling her that, this is all on the up and up. He has interacted with their family. But she doesn't prepare Billy, I feel like, in a way that you would expect her to. And it's kind of odd to me that she would even encourage him to go and ask at that moment. Like, you would think that she would say, like, this is not the right time, let's call on them privately, like, whatever. So she's kind of an interesting variable in this whole relationship. But I do love at the end, they're like getting into the carriage and she's like, enough, this family is too much drama. Like, we're not doing this. Like, we've got to go. And, of course, then that results in this really sad and kind of heartbreaking interaction towards the end of the episode, where Billy basically breaks up with her and he says, like, I can't do this anymore. I like you said, Amanda, it's like, I thought I had it in me to kind of fight for you for the end. But this is just the stakes are at a level that, like, I'm not willing to kind of play at. And of course, then that sets Gladys up for just like a 1-2 punch, because she goes back inside, having had her heart broken a little bit. And the Duke shows up with a lawyer and sort of announces that he is there to kind of do a marriage negotiation, which is kind of insane. So we're seeing another example where she's not getting that really normal courtship experience. We've seen them have dinners together in Newport and things like that. But we basically learned that there's been a backdoor deal that has happened essentially between Bertha and the Duke. And Dawn, I think that is like a good reminder that regardless of whether or not there's a love match involved with a Gilded Age marriage, like, there is a contractual element to this as well, especially when you're talking about people at this level of society.
Yeah, there's an expectation that both parties are bringing something to the table. And he is basically coming to develop a prenuptial agreement. Whether or not it would have been called that at the term, there are lots of financial details to be ironed out. Although obviously it's a conversation that only the Duke and Bertha have been privy to. Even George is like, you said you would tell me everything. And I love her, like, I did now, kind of aside to him. But I thought we've been talking about how aligned this story is with Consuelo and the Duke of Marlborough. So I took a look, and it's reported that there was a kind of agreed upon settlement of a dowry. So not necessarily a prenuptial agreement, but a dowry, which is basically a payment for the title and of $2.5 million. So the Duke was set up for life. He received an annual income of $100,000 a year, no matter what happened, even in the event of death or divorce. But William K. Vanderbilt also set Consuelo up with her own separate income. So perhaps we'll see George kind of put some protective parameters around Gladys if this does indeed move forward, which I feel like they had their moment. They should have eloped when they could have. So I feel like the Duke is inevitable at this point.
Yes, inevitable is a good way to put it. And yeah, I think that going forward into the next episodes, it's going to be interesting to see this sort of shift into George's court. Because of course, what we also see in this episode is the ways in which Gladys's kind of romantic situation is really wreaking havoc on the Russell household and the family dynamics. George comes back in from his trip to Arizona and is thrown into this really dramatic family conversation where tensions are very high. And we see, a pretty interesting conversation between him and Bertha as well, where he's just kind of like, what the hell is going on? Like, this is not what I thought was happening. I promised Gladys this, what's going on? And they have this really, honest conversation, I think, where Bertha explains what she's doing and why, and George is really caught in the middle. And I know, Amanda, you made the good point that, it's very clear that Bertha is planting these stories in the press. She basically admits as much. But that is a big gamble for her because by her own admission, if something doesn't work out, it makes it look like Gladys is the failure and she couldn't hook her man.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this since we were talking earlier and since last night. I think what it comes down to, because it is a gamble, right? Like Bertha is putting her family reputation on the line. But thinking back over the trajectory of the arc of her character, like how much she has grown, how I think Gladys says to her about Billy's family, like, you'd have been thrilled to have them interested in me years ago. And she's like, what was the word? We've surpassed them, or what you said it, Dawn, surpassed or
overtaken them.
We've overtaken. So I think Bertha has had so many successes that like maybe she feels unstoppable. Maybe she feels like it's, she's going to make it happen come hell or high water. Like that she's not leaving much to chance. In her mind, this is how it's going to be. And she knows the steps to make it, take place. Maybe she's thinking there's no way this isn't going to come to fruition. I can win over my husband. I bully this girl into this marriage. Like we're getting this. So it is interesting though, because she's really, and she's gambling it's in her mind. She doesn't have an ally in this. She's got, this is her scheme and her plan. Even her husband, as you said, Kelsie, is not in the loop until he comes back. And she basically is like, this is my realm. You do what you do in the boardroom. I'm not in there. You're taking these chances. This household and this family's future is mine, and this is what we're doing. So it is very interesting. Like the spheres of influence between men and women come into play, and there's a lot of pawns in this game that she's playing. Her own daughter, being the main one. But I think she thinks she is undefeatable in this quest of hers.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, we haven't seen her lose yet. I mean, each season is sort of set up around an ambition of Bertha Russell's, right? It's like the first season was sort of her wanting to have this big grand, coming out where Caroline Astor came to her party. Check, she did that, right? Season 2, it's making the Metropolitan Opera, the place to be. Check, she did that. And so this one is very much set up as, getting her daughter married off to this Duke is her thing that she has set her mind to. And we have not seen her fail at something like that yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. And I was listening to an interview with Carrie Coon, who plays Bertha Russell, and she made a really interesting observation, which is that, Bertha is a person with ambition with nowhere to put it, right? Like if she had been a man, she would have been a titan of industry like a George Russell or a Jay Gould or whoever, like a Henry Clay Frick. But she's born a woman. And so her, like you said, her sphere of influence is in the home, it's in society. And she does not back down from a fight in that way. And so, Gladys's story is certainly one of the big things that comes out of Aurora's benefit. But we would be remiss to not talk about the other very dramatic thing that happens at poor Aurora's benefit, which is, we see her continuously trying to cover the tracks of this failing marriage. She's trying to hold it together. She's trying to hold her own of not giving the divorce. And so she makes an excuse that Charles is sick. He's not there because it's unusual that he wouldn't be at this event. Until Charles just blows the whole thing up. And not only does he show up after she has told everyone that he is ill, he shows up arm in arm with the mistress just out in the open. And Amanda, you had I think a perfect observation, which is that this is another really good example of how women in this era really can be, or often are, at the mercy of the men in their lives, for better or for worse. And in Aurora's case, she's done everything right up until this point, and it hasn't saved her from essentially getting screwed over.
Yeah, it's a move. I mean, he just sweeps in. It's his home, right? But he sweeps in with this woman, and he clearly calculated this. And Aurora is left just speechless. And humiliated, and he's completely forced her hand in a way that he can as a man. What is her recourse, right? She has almost nothing to do except save face or try to save face as best she can, but it's pretty clear to the women in the know in the room that this is, this is what's happening. And yeah, I remember talking about this in season 1, which feels like a long time ago now, but when we were talking about Marion and how she was, her father had passed away and she didn't have resources she thought she had. And, Agnes and Ada, each of them had been affected by the actions and funds or lack of funds of a husband or father or brother. And you're left to deal with that. And so Aurora, if you think too much about it, it is the most troubling storyline because she is a good woman doing all of the things and just wants to live, her life. And they keep talking about banishing her to Newport. And, I don't know where this will go next. She's an important character in the series, so I don't know that they're going to just sort of move her out of things, but it really makes you stop and think about how powerful or how powerless wealthy women could be given the scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I know although I will say, love a moment of redemption for Agnes because, Agnes in the previous episode is very much like, yeah, you get divorced, like, we're not going to invite you to parties anymore. But then she has that great moment where Charles is like, Aunt Agnes, like, you need to talk reason to her. And she's like, don't call me Aunt Agnes. I am not your aunt anymore. And it's like, hell yeah. Like, you get, like, shut up, Charles, you suck. But yeah, he is ruthless in this. And it is really sad because I think Aurora's, yeah, she's been a good person to everyone in the show at this point. And so it's sad to watch her have to deal with that. There is a really, oh yeah, go ahead.
Were there signs of this that I missed in season 2? Yeah. I think there were, right? This is like a left field dramatic. Okay. It wasn't like they were at odds. Okay. Just thought maybe I missed all that.
No, I think they've Charles has been a non-entity up until this point. Like, truly. Like, he's just been a good-looking husband, just sort of at her side, like, not really doing anything, which is why I think it was so shocking in the last episode that all of a sudden he's got this mistress and he wants a divorce and it's like full steam ahead. So no, you didn't miss anything.
No, he's being especially cruel in this like scorched earth policy. It can't suit either of them, but inevitably it's Aurora who's going to be taken out.
It is. And there is a very interesting blink and you miss it. We'll call it a, snapshot of another person who is based on a real human being. We meet another Astor, surprisingly, at this little soiree. And it is it is Charlotte Astor Drayton, which is another one of Caroline Astor's daughters. In it, we see, Caroline tell Carrie that she needs to go over and sort of deal with her sister and get her sister away from this man that she's talking to. Charlotte Astor, of course, was a real woman. She was married at the time to a man named J. Coleman Drayton, which, fun fact, if you have ever been to Drayton Hall outside of Charleston, South Carolina, same family. He was a cousin of those Draytons, so it's all interconnected. And their marriage was incredibly unhappy, not very stable at all. And in the show, you hear Carrie say, that she has to get her sister away from a Mr. Barrow. That is a very pointed reference to the man that the actual Charlotte Astor supposedly had an affair with in the 1890s. So we're a little bit earlier. The timeline's a little bit off. But that affair is the direct result of a divorce that Charlotte Astor eventually has. And so it was a pretty scandalous affair, lots of coverage in the newspaper. It's really interesting. A judge eventually does grant Charlotte a divorce in the 1890s, not on the grounds of adultery, but on the grounds of desertion, basically charging that her husband had deserted her without adequate proof that she had actually committed adultery. And then the other interesting thing is that the husband sues for custody of the children and she doesn't fight him. She just lets him have the kids and she goes off to her own world. She moves to England, marries an English guy, and she is actually also disinherited by the Astors, presumably as a result of kind of bringing this scandal on. And so it's such an interesting, her inclusion feels intentional here. Like I can't imagine that that's an accident. And I think it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek reference to the fact that the Astors will not go without their own divorce scandal, even though we see Caroline's mood and her the way that she interacts with Aurora shift like on a dime. Like, I mean, as soon as she clocks what's happening here, that it's really, a scandal, the marriage is in trouble, a divorce is imminent. I mean, she's out of there because she doesn't want to be, associated with it within a 10-foot pole. So it's interesting. I don't know if we'll see more of Charlotte or not, but I cannot imagine that is an accident of her inclusion there. So another very interesting real life person that, makes a cameo here. We want to shift gears totally and talk about Peggy because we haven't talked about Peggy enough yet. And so we're gonna talk about Peggy in a couple of different aspects, but that was sort of the other big thing that was happening in this episode is that we get to see a little bit of a resolution to Peggy's health storyline. She finally gets the health treatment that she deserves, the medical treatment that she deserves. But because of that, we get to see her worlds collide a little bit. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've ever seen her parents interact with Agnes and Ada. I don't think. Maybe
I don't think so.
Passing, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
It was an interesting moment to have them arrive at their Van Ryn Forte household, and you have that really interesting, interaction in the beginning where Dorothy wants to go to the servants' entrance, and Arthur says, like, hell no, we're here to see our daughter. We were invited here. We're going up the stairs, which again, sort of, I think is a subtle just reminder of what we're dealing with in terms of society here in the Gilded Age. But ultimately it leads to a really honest conversation, I think, between Dorothy and Arthur and Agnes, where Agnes essentially apologizes for, taking so long to get Peggy the help that she needs and, apologizes for what happens with the white doctor in the previous episode. And Dawn, you had pointed out that this conversation, is Arthur really pointing out some of Agnes's blind spots, but also a way maybe a little bit for him to ascertain how far her open-mindedness goes in terms of her relationship to Peggy, race, and all of those things.
Yeah, I thought it was such an honest conversation. And there's a way that he pushed back that was so firm, but still respectful. Like, he's very insistent on their dignity. In the same way he's like, we're invited, we're coming through the front door. That he pushes back on her and saying politeness is not a cure for 2.5 centuries of slavery and racism. It gets at that kind of unreconciled, like, rupture in American history that people are still unwilling to talk about openly or uncomfortable with talking about openly. So to see the conversation happen in such an open and honest way, I thought was really interesting. And, Agnes is claiming naivete. She's assumed that the doctor would treat Peggy because she, a white lady, was asking him to. But Mr. Scott is not buying that naivete is that's willful ignorance probably on Agnes's part, is to just assume that because of her own white privilege, it's going to be extended in this particular moment. And he calls her out on that. Ignoring racism doesn't mean that it ceases to exist. And he, points out there were real repercussions for Peggy's health. And they want to know that she's going to take care of their daughter if she's going to stay employed there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an interesting moment right at the beginning of that interaction, when they first arrive, and Dr. Kirkland, I think, has arrived at well. And I think Dorothy or Arthur kind of points out that this is sort of a weird circumstance. Like, they point out the fact that it is maybe a little bit odd that, Peggy is employed in a household like this, and that she'd be living there, and that they would be interacting in that way. And Ada, in her sweet Ada way, is sort of like, oh, well, that's how we were brought up. And, our father was involved with XY charities, and, he brought us up to be open-minded. And it was like so akin to some of those things that you hear now, where it's like, well, I can't be racist. I have Black friends, like, right. Like, it's like that same kind of thing of like them just thinking that because they were brought up in this very specific way that, like, they are not participating in this racist system or anything. And Arthur is the one that, isn't willing to let that lie. Like, he feels like, no, I'm going to point this out to you because my daughter is living here and, like, this impacts her experience. And I'm sitting here thinking that, like, that shouldn't be a surprise to Agnes. She had to mediate that whole interaction with Armstrong. Like, Armstrong is the most vocal of her sort of racist beliefs and everything else. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to Agnes. I think that Arthur is correct in that in a lot of ways. So to switch gears to more fun things for Peggy, we obviously have our new love interest, which I'm so thrilled with. This super cute doctor that shows up and just takes charge of the situation. I think my favorite thing is that Marion immediately is like,
Yeah.
what's the
They
vibe?
don't waste any time. Like they're flirty, kind of cutesy right away. I'm totally here for it. Anyone who's watched a couple of these episodes knows how much I wanted a good love interest for Peggy.
She earned it. Okay. She's been through some stuff. But it's like it's like he's caring for her. She's in her nightgown of all things. Like at some point halfway through, she starts like fixing her hair. Like as soon as she's like, oh, wait a second, he is cute. But like Marion's just like watching it and she's like, I see this. I see what's happening. There's the chemistry is palpable. But I love that he's interested in her career and he wants to read her story in the newspaper, which is really nice. And Amanda, you were saying that like it's just really enjoyable to see Peggy kind of come out on the other side of some of the things that we've seen her have to deal with in season 1 and season 2, even as she's getting over this illness. But like she's had some wins in her career, like her relationship with her family is getting better. Like good things for Peggy for once.
Yeah, she's had a lot of struggles. I feel like her character, and even setting aside, or you can't set it aside, but what had happened with her husband and her baby, and we were talking about how she was basically estranged from her parents at the beginning of all this, and so there's this trajectory now where she has persevered in her writing, and she's held true to what she believes is right. She's had some kind of dreadful pseudo love situations happening. I mean, she really hasn't had like a man worthy of her, kind of show up. And anyway, I was just thinking of how nice it is that that scene where they, after the doctor leaves and her mom and dad are in her room and it's super cozy and like cute. And I have one daughter, so I know those moments of like just being together. And they were telling her she's got this invitation to come to Newport and speak. And I love this. At first, she's like, I don't know if I can get away, but you can kind of tell she wants to do it. And then she just like settles in and she's like, let's go. And she, her mother wants to go. And then she's like, Dad, are you coming? And it was just this like full circle moment of her having opportunity, being recognized for her intelligence and her work, and then like having her family be part of that. So it was just a very, I hope that turns into something, that they carry this through and she has some upward storylines and there's a cute doctor in the background. So I feel like Peggy is set up for some success this season.
I think that I'm excited to see where her storyline goes and see her, do some different things. I think a little bit of stuff outside of the Van Ryn household, right? Like outside of her interactions as part of the staff, she's in this kind of weird position with the staff where she's kind of a member of the staff. She's Agnes's secretary, but she's also kind of not. Like she's, she certainly is, outside a little bit, mostly because of how weird Armstrong is and sort of navigating those things. So, I'm excited for her to get out of New York and go do something for herself and see what happens. And we wanted to wrap up by talking a little bit about the Van Ryn and the Forte household, because of course the other thing is that we do see a little bit of a decision made about who is actually in charge here. Surprisingly, we get the final confirmation from Aurora, who's sort of serving as like a third party referee where she sort of makes the decision. Like holds the purse string. She is paying the payroll. She is in charge. And so we see a decision made, but we'll continue to see the ways that ripple affects. But one of the first things that she comes out with once that is determined is this temperance pledge. Amanda's shaking her head, which is that she is all in on Temperance. She is ready, and she has this very weird interaction where she puts it in front of the staff and asks them to sign, and it's one of the funniest parts of the episode, in my opinion.
They're all like deer in the headlights. Like, what is this? What are we supposed to do with this? Like, I feel like those servants, they know how to navigate most things. And then there's this, and it's like, it's our mistress. I work for her. Do I sign this? What is the cook? I can't remember her name. She's like,
Bauer.
I have a beer at the end of every day. She's like, don't take my beer away. And she's like, we have to work so hard. But it was this moment where, and it just sort of shows cluelessness on Ada's part, or maybe she doesn't care, but it's like, what are you doing to your staff, by making this ask? But I think she also, I don't know, I think it has to do with Luke. It has to do with what she feels is the right thing to do. She's got a purpose now, or is finding a purpose. But I agree, she is all in and probably too far in, and they're going to drive her out of that house if she doesn't stop coming around with this pledge.
I was saying to Dawn and Amanda earlier that it's giving a lot of like multi-level marketing scheme energy, which is that every time she interacts with another human being, she's like, would you like to sign my pledge? And people are just like, can you not? Like, I don't want to do that. Marion has the sweetest reaction where she's just like, I don't see the harm in having a glass of wine, so I'm going to say no. But yeah, she's putting her staff in a very weird position because it's been established that they are beholden to her in terms of her signing their paychecks. And so has she really given them an option? Like, she kind of says like, oh, no pressure. But it's one of those things where it's like, you live in her house / Agnes's house, you work for her. Do you really have an option? And I feel like maybe not.
I still maintain that if Mrs. Armstrong is your like first and most enthusiastic supporter, then whatever you are backing, like I would rethink it.
Red flag. If Armstrong is on your team, red flag. You just need to reassess the situation.
That's the best analysis of the whole thing right there.
I was going to say, I also do want to give Mrs. Bauer just like a little bit bigger of a shout out, because one, she has her line about needing to have her beer at the end of the night, but she also so amazingly puts Armstrong in her place and is just like, enough. Like, everyone is sick of your crap. Like, you are the worst. Like, stop. Like, no one cares. Like, no one cares what you have to say. Be done. She continues to manage to just be like the most insufferable human being on the planet, at Mrs. Armstrong. And it's just the worst. So that is our whirlwind reaction to all of the things on episode 2. Of course, there are so many other things that we're loving that we haven't even gotten to touch on yet. I am sure we will be able to designate almost a whole episode to #Larian at some point. We have to acknowledge the steamy kiss in the cab. It's a lot. It's happening. We also do feel like they got a little bit of a soft launch by having Marion be at that dinner, which is really interesting. I hope that we get to see in the dining room next episode, that we pick up and we get to see some of this dinner, because it's got to be insane and awkward.
Who's got a front row seat for this like family drama?
It's like, is Marion going to take a page out of Billy's book and be like, you guys are a lot. Maybe I don't want to deal with this.
Myself out.
I'm going to go across the street, and this has been fun, but I think I'm out. I don't know. We'll see. And then, of course, we are also really still loving the Larry and Jack storyline. And I am excited to see the actual meeting. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I hope that Jack has a moment where he just like knocks everybody's socks off in this meeting. So some things to look forward to going forward. And I'm sure that we will get to all of those things and more in the weeks to come. But for now, thanks for watching the Unofficial Gilded Age After Show. If you can't get enough of the Gilded Age between episodes and you are looking to immerse yourself in the real thing, don't forget that there is a incredible Gilded Age mansion right here in Pittsburgh if you happen to be in town. If you're looking for something to do over the weekend, come check out our tour of CLAYTON at the Frick Pittsburgh. You can find tickets on our website. We will get into all of the things that were happening in Pittsburgh during the actual Gilded Age, so don't miss it if you can. We will see you next week. We'll be back next week to discuss Season 3, Episode 3, Love is Never Easy. We'll see you next Friday. Thanks for watching.